Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. The topic of today's conversation is protecting the hemp industry's future. And I'm Sean Hauser, partner and chair of the Hemp and Cannabinoid Practice Group at Vicente Cederberg, where we work frequently on hemp law and policy in coordination with some of the brightest minds and advocates in the hemp space. So I'm thrilled to be joined here today by Eric Steenstra, founder and president of Vote Hemp, which is the longest standing hemp advocacy organization, and with Courtney Moran from Agricultural Hemp Solutions and Earthlaw LLC, attorney and advocate. And the goal today was to really get kind of the leaders and sharpest minds in hemp together to discuss where are we now. It's a critical time in the hemp industry as we are experiencing the first levels of implementation of the IFR and the nearing sunset of the 2014 Farm Bill, and understanding this important window in time we have to address some of the issues in the current hemp regulations that are preventing us from having a viable program, and what are really the short-term and long-term solutions that we need to focus on, and understanding what is the industry doing and how to get involved. And I'll turn it over to Courtney and Eric in a second, but wanted to sort of set the table with where are we. So, the Farm Bill passed in December 2018, and we last year got the Interim Final Rule, which governs U.S. hemp production. It was effective immediately on Halloween of 2019. This Interim Final Rule governs in states that do not have active 2014 Farm Bill programs, and these rules may change based on public comment prior to the final rule. The IFR will sunset on October 31st, 2021, when it will be replaced by a final rule. And many states are operating under the 2014 program for this 2020 growing season, which just kicked off, but under the current law, all are going to have to transition after October. And I think it's quite notable that a majority of states, including the more mature markets, Oregon, Colorado, others, Montana, are choosing to operate under the 2014 Farm Bill for the 2020 growing season, and it's going to be a significant, difficult transition as they transition to the 2020 Farm Bill, or sorry, the 2018 Farm Bill and IFR provisions for the 2020 growing season. About 21 states have plans that have been formally approved by USDA and are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill already, including newer states like Texas, who didn't have 2014 programs. And we've got New Hampshire and Mississippi electing to operate under the federal license. And so the 2020 growing season is really going to be an important test drive of the interim final rule, and is going to highlight some of the issues that we are all aware of and that many have commented on already. Some of those issues include the DEA requirement, or the requirement for DEA labs to test hemp and to dispose of non-compliant hemp. Although this requirement has been effectively waived for this growing season, it is not formally removed in the final rule. The 15-day sampling requirement, the requirement that all crops have to be sampled, combined with the total THC measurement standard for measuring THC content, are going to make it very difficult for farmers to have a viable crop, and it's going to be very difficult for many, especially cannabinoid farmers, to proceed without undue risk. Other problematic provisions include that farmers could face criminal penalties or other penalties for growing hot hemp, although there's a presumption that hemp that is under 0.5% THC is not violative if if there's not a negligent violation, meaning farmers took all reasonable measures to grow their hemp, they use best practices, certified seed, that window is only up to 0.5% THC. So if farmers go hot after 0.5%, and even if they used all reasonable standards, they could still be violative of the rules and face penalties, including not being able to grow hemp, and in the future under these programs, and potential additional penalties. And I think big picture, most of the problematic provisions in the IFR boiled down to the USDA's attempt to regulate around this THC content, and that 0.3% is the legal standard for hemp. Anything that's above that is federally legal marijuana. And they were obligated to consult with DOJ, DEA, other agencies in developing these rules. And unlike other agricultural commodities, we have controls in here that aren't really appropriate for farming practice. So I think that the industry had great success in the first round of comments on the IFR last year, speaking out about the DEA testing issue and the DEA's involvement in disposing hemp and the practical impact that's going to have on the industry, which was really untenable. And it's going to be really critical as we go forward for the industry to comment on these other provisions and use this next comment period, when it is reopened at some point before the final rule, to really give USDA feedback. And we're going to jump in today as to what can we address in the public comment period and what has to be changed in statute. Where do we have to press Congress? Where is, longer term change needed? I think the timing here is important. The expiration of the 2014 Farm Bill is upon us. It'll be here before we know it. These final rules will be here before we know it. And do we have time to fix these rules before they're final? Are we going to be able to survive under a full 2018 Farm Bill authority? So I'll turn it over to Courtney to address, how can we activate the industry to fix the IFR, and what do we need to do in comment versus legislatively, and what's our best bet to protect our industry here?
Thank you so much for introducing the topic here, Sean. I really do appreciate that. So as she mentioned, I'm Courtney Moran, Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions. And I want to talk to you today about the Agricultural Hemp Solutions campaign to align federal legislation and the USDA rulemaking with the domestic hemp industry. We've all worked so hard for so many years, some of us for decades, trying to educate the public and Congress and our regulators about the value of hemp, and that this really is truly an agricultural commodity. And now we're here, 2020, hemp is federally legal. As Sean mentioned, we're in our very first year of commercial production, and yet we are faced with all of these rules and regulations that are not treating our industry like the lawful agricultural industry that we are. And so that's why we're having this webinar today, to really talk to all of you about what is going on the federal level and how you can get involved to help make a difference and to really set a solid foundation for our industry. Now, we've all been concerned about these USDA Interim Final Rules since they were published last October. And I've heard the same concerns over and over and over again, right? We all know that these rules are more restrictive than the 2014 Farm Bill pilot program rules that were put into place in states throughout the country. We've been operating under these, in some states, almost 6 years, 7 years, really without any issues. And now we have what is considered a federal legal agricultural commodity, and yet our rules are more restrictive. So Sean gave a really nice introduction and regulatory history here, but I just want to point out a few things. Is that The interim final rules were published October 31st of 2019, and the 2018 Farm Bill provided for a 1-year transition period between the 2014 Farm Bill Authority and the 2018 Farm Bill Authority. And so that's this transition period that we're in right now, but that transition period is ending very quickly. And because of these concerns that are, pretty widespread throughout the country with these interim final rules, there were at one point 25 states of the 48 that have legal hemp that had elected to remain under that 2014 Farm Bill Authority. As we sit here today, there are 23 states that are still currently operating under that 2014 Farm Bill Authority, but this transition period is ending very soon, October 31st of 2020. That is just 3 months away. And at that time, every jurisdiction has to transition over to the 2018 Farm Bill Authority and the interim final rules. And now the states that have been still operating under the 2014 Farm Bill have been advised that they should submit their plans to USDA by August 15th. That means just over 2 weeks away is when all the states that are still operating under the 2014 Farm Bill have been encouraged to submit their plans to USDA. So there really is, not as much time as I think as we all originally thought. So what's been going on? We have, as Sean mentioned, 21 states that are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill, 23 that are operating under the 2014 Farm Bill. But there are these underlying concerns that are continually being expressed. And fortunately, so many of you wrote into USDA, which was fantastic during that initial public comment period. It was really, imperative to see some of the changes that we've seen so far, which was that enforcement discretion that was published by USDA back in in February. But it's important to note that an enforcement guidance that was published is only actually in effect either until October 31st of 2021 or until publication of final rules. So there is no guarantee that that enforcement discretion is actually going to continue going forward. And so the concerns that we all have with the interim final rules are still those exact same concerns. And so Sean did lay them out really nicely, but I wanted to reiterate a few of them here. Allowing farmers only a 15-day harvest window with each sampling, non-representative sampling methodologies, mandatory testing, total THC testing of every single lot of hemp produced, requiring laboratories to register with the DEA, and the arbitrary negligence threshold of 0.5%. Now, all of these concerns that I outline here in this particular slide are things that we could address in the current rulemaking. These are things that do not take a legislative fix, but they are things that could be addressed through rulemaking. And so it's very important that we collectively and are really conveying that these are unilateral concerns and providing USDA with information as to why and what the solution is that we would like to see. Now, as I mentioned, that transition period ends October 31st. And so when we hit November 1st, as the rules stand today and as legislation stands today, every jurisdiction in the country is required to come into compliance with the 2018 Farm Bill and those interim final rules. That means that everyone will be under the same regulations, these same sampling requirements, testing requirements, harvest requirements, this arbitrary negligence threshold, the requirement for the criminal records checks to ensure that you haven't had a felony in the last 10 years, unless you're grandfathered in from the pilot programs. And so we don't have that much time until this change is happening. And, it's unfortunate, the timing, right? It's going to happen right in the middle of harvest for some folks. So it could be a very, interesting situation that happens on a few farms. But, we have this opportunity right now, right? We have these concerns. They're pretty unilateral. The time is coming when the transition period is going from 2014 to 2018, but we are in rulemaking. So this is our opportunity to make a difference and to make a change to those final rules before they become final. And USDA has made pretty clear in, numerous testimonies before Congress, on other webinars, that their goal is to have these rules published and final before the 2021 production season. So what does that mean? That means publication could be as soon as January or February of 2021. That's only 6 months away, so we don't have that much time. As such, our industry really needs to engage now. And we need to engage now because we have this opportunity and we are still in the rulemaking. You know, we all want to see reasonable oversight of our federal commercial hemp production program. We want these rules to be rational and consistent with the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill. Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley have written letters to USDA pointing out the inconsistencies with congressional intent. We want to see science-based federal legislation, which Eric's going to talk a little bit more about soon. We would like broadened USDA authority over the federal hemp program. You know, we're a legal agricultural commodity. We don't need DEA oversight. We haven't had DEA oversight since 2014. Why should they be coming in now? You know, we need to establish protections for our U.S. hemp farmers and the ancillary businesses. And we can do this together by coming together, influencing the final rulemaking, lobbying USDA, lobbying DEA, lobbying Congress, providing science-based education, and, you know, eventually securing passage of subsequent federal legislation. So I just want to reiterate, you know, before we get any further, just how important it is for us all to work together and to engage now before these rules become final, because we have to get this right now. The final rules really set the foundation for how our industry is going to be regulated. And, you know, I've been hearing from folks all over the country, been hearing from regulators all over the country for the past 9 months that they are not happy with these rules. And so we need to do something before it's too late. And that's why Agricultural Hemp Solutions has launched the campaign to align federal legislation and USDA rulemaking with the domestic hemp industry, because we want to ensure that the federal regulatory foundation is the foundation that you want to see for the future of our industry. You know, it really is going to take all of us coming together. That's why we're having this webinar today, you know, to show that, you know, different folks around the country are working together. We are having these conversations. We know how important it is, given what the history has been, given the obstacles, the fear that we've had to overcome to get to where we are today. But we're really still just in the beginning phases of our industry, and we have this opportunity now. And so it's really important that we work together to ensure that hemp is America's next commodity cash crop. Thanks.
Hey, Sean, we can't hear you. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Sorry. In the issues Courtney listed, those can be addressed in comment and changed by the USDA. Things like the sampling window, the total THC standard, the DEA testing. One of the issues that I think really sticks out in the hemp regulations and for the industry is the felony ban that persons with drug convictions in the past 10 years cannot participate in the program. And that is actually something in the 2018 Farm Bill itself. And, you know, as we're experiencing this really global civil rights movement and, you know, looking inward and, you know, doing the work ourselves and as an industry, what is the hemp industry doing? What can we do to address that provision and, you know, do better as an industry for social equity? And Eric, I know Vote Hemp has written letters and done some work there, if you can speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. We worked with the Farm Bureau and NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and the Drug Policy Alliance to try to push back on that the felony drug provisions. When they were first added by Senator Grassley, it was a lifetime ban. And it was pretty comprehensive, and we wanted to get rid of it completely. And we did write letters both to congressional, you know, to the ag committees that were working on that, and the conference committee that worked on it. And also later on, we were successful in moving it somewhat. They limited it to 10 years, and that was not everything we wanted, but at least we limited it somewhat. And we did include it. There was a grandfather provision as well. But then we worked with USDA to try to push to get them to interpret it in as limited a way as possible. So primarily it applies to principals in a company. So again, still not everything we wanted. And I think we need to get rid of that provision completely. I don't know if we'll have an opportunity before the next Farm Bill to be able to change that or not. but I would, definitely are interested in working with others in the industry to completely remove the felony ban. It's completely unacceptable. And, so we would welcome anyone that wants to collaborate with us on that.
Yeah, I'll echo what Eric just said. It was originally a complete ban. If you've ever had a felony of a controlled substance, you were out. And it did take significant negotiations to get us down to those 10 years. And while we all wanted to see it out completely, it was a small victory compared to what it was, but it's still unacceptable to what it is. And so I echo those efforts that Eric is making. And so please, help make a change.
Thanks. And yeah, I think, again, that's something we need to engage on with our state representatives, with Congress. It's not something USDA can entirely get rid of because it's in statute. But they did, like Eric said, the limitation to what they call key participants, so those with management control or ownership rather than, farmhands and field workers. Like you said, I think that was a small victory. The other thing that I want to ensure folks understand has to be done in statute is any extension of the 2014 Farm Bill authority. I know that for a lot of states, Colorado included, having a longer transition period and time to really do the work to address these rules would be game-changing to the viability of the hemp industry and ensuring the continued success of these markets that have been operating under 2014 to date and have done so for years successfully, like Courtney said, without the DEA. So, do you guys think there's appetite congressionally or an understanding of the need to extend the 2014 Farm Bill? And is there still time to get that done? What does that look like?
I think there is. Go ahead, Courtney, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There is time to do so. We don't have a lot of time, but there is time to do so. So there is an appropriations bill that is currently, being drafted by both the House and the Senate. There are several different offices that understand, the struggle that everyone is going through on the ground and understand why so many states have elected to remain under the 2014 Farm Bill. And so there are proposals on the table for additional extensions beyond the October 31st, 2020 deadline. The House, they did proposal forward for an extension until September 31st of 2021. Now, while that's better than October 31 of this year, I personally feel that it's pretty futile because that would land right in the middle of harvest season next year and really is not going to do anything for everybody. So what I would like to see and what I have been advocating for is an extension until January 1st of 2022. That would give a full additional year of operation under the 2014 Farm Bill, and it would, provide clarification beyond what is the projected publication of the final rules this upcoming January or February. Eric?
Yeah, that's great, Courtney. I agree. I think there is an opportunity here in the appropriations process to potentially extend this, and we're definitely advocating with that. We've talked to a few offices about that, and I think it's possible, and yet, it's only going to fix things for some states, right? Because some states just don't seem able or willing to continue with the old program. Some of the states have already kind of moved forward with the 2018 program. It would take a legislative action to be able to go backwards. So while we think it's important to do that, if we can, ideally, we really have to fix this, fix the 1%, the move this to 1% from 0.3 is the real solution here. So, but I do think it's possible, and we're definitely going to continue working towards that.
Yeah, and I just add really quick, not only that, but, right now with the October 31 deadline, it's still going to fall in the middle of harvest for several different farms and, for especially, different states. And so I know that there are several different states out there that have already made the request to USDA to allow their programs to continue at least until January of this year so that they don't have to interrupt what's happening in their regulations and in the middle of harvest. But unfortunately, the way that the legislation is currently drafted, that is a hard deadline from the perspective of USDA. And so we really do need that legislative fix to make that change.
Great point.
Yeah. And like Eric said, it is going to be challenging for states to have to make shifts that require legislative action, especially during the pandemic and all the uncertainties we have ahead of us. So I think that makes focusing our efforts congressionally and on the state level really important, and understanding the limited time we have left. And on the note of legislative changes and the 1%, as Eric alluded to, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to discuss the potential of raising the THC standard for hemp to 1%, which is a standard that, unlike the US standard, is not arbitrary, is based in science, and one that a number of other countries have adopted. But like extending the 2014 Farm Bill, it would have to be done legislatively. So, despite, I think, numerous comments to USDA on this issue, asking them to raise the limit, it's outside of their purview. But Eric, can you tell us a little bit about where we got this standard, and is it reasonable that we could, get to 1%, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Sean. Where the heck, how did we get here? Where did this 0.3 come from? And I'm going to give a little background on that. When I started doing advocacy around this issue almost 20 years ago, we had we only had the Canada and Europe and China and a couple of other places to look at, and the main influencers were Canada and the European Union, and both of them had already adopted this 0.3 standard, and so it was kind of the de facto standard because that's what they were using. Now, it's important to note that at that time, there was no cannabinoid farming. Nobody was growing hemp for cannabinoids yet. All the farmers in those locations were growing either for fiber or for grain. And so the 0.3 standard had a little different, the perspective on it was a little bit different. It was easier for some of those varieties to maybe meet that standard. So I'm not saying that, that we don't, that makes it right, but it was a different perspective then. In any case, so where did this come from? And the answer is that it started out with a researcher in Canada by the name of Dr. Ernie Small, who was a researcher there, had been working on cannabis for many years, has written a number of important works on cannabis. And he and a colleague had published a paper, and they mentioned this dividing line between hemp and marijuana. And it was purely in their mind for the purposes of establishing a biological taxonomy there. So they weren't thinking about it from a policy perspective at all. It's pretty clear from a scientific standpoint that 0.3 has no basis. There's no science that says 0.3 is a magic number where, cannabis becomes marijuana. In fact, most marijuana varieties typically have well north of 10%, often 20 and 30% THC in them. So hemp with 1% THC or less is extremely low in THC. And also you have to keep in mind that since hemp varieties have a greater amount of CBD or cannabidiol, usually a greater than 1-to-1 ratio with THC, that also has an impact on how THC interacts in the body. And so the idea that you're going to use 1% THC hemp to get high just doesn't make a lot of sense. Nobody would be interested in buying it. So in any case, that's kind of the background of where this was. But one other thing to add too is that Ernie Small, when he realized that sort of this had become, his mention of this had become the standard, he mentioned in an interview in 2018 that he had no idea it would ever be used that way, and then he thought it was an irrational way to break down the differentiation between the two varieties. So how did it become the U.S. standard? Again, I mentioned the European Union and had their standard there. The Common Agricultural Policy originally was at 0.3%. In some more recent years, there was some efforts by the French to lower that, believe it or not, to 0.2. And that is the current standard. But when this first came about, when we were first looking at it, it was 0.3 in Europe. And then when Canada legalized, they also adopted this 0.3 standard. So that was basically when the U.S. was looking at it. In the first Farm Bill that was introduced in 2005, we had to look at what the international standards were, and that was sort of the basis for it. And Representative Ron Paul from Texas felt like that was the right way to go to just adopt a standard that was similar to what was used in other countries. So once that became the standard, then as cannabinoids became more, began to come into play here, we started to realize that this 0.3 limit might be problematic. And so I know one of the things we did in the last effort for the 2018 Farm Bill, we did work with Representative Comer from Kentucky to try to get that increased. And he did actually introduce a version of the Industrial Hemp Farming Act in 2018 with Representative Goodlatte that had a provision allowing for 0.6 for research. Unfortunately, that did not make the final cut. There were others, including Senator McConnell, who felt that they didn't want to see anything above 0.3. So it was a difficult job trying to convince Congress just to legalize hemp. And at some point, we had to get this through, and we could have lost the whole thing if we ended up fighting just about the THC limit at that point. So that's how we ended up there. So why do we need to change this now? Well, obviously, a lot of farmers have run into problems, especially since the USDA introduced the interim final rule last year. We had, quite a few farms that ended up having their crops test hot and had them destroyed. You can see some of the articles here. The economic impact on farmers was dramatic, and we didn't anticipate that honestly, that the USDA was going to come up with this total THC. And for what it's worth, nowhere in the Farm Bill are the words total THC written. It just says Delta 9, and it talks about post-decarboxylation. So the USDA came up with that language on its own, but ultimately the way it's been interpreted has made it very difficult for most varieties of hemp to be compliant. And so that's our challenge. So how are we going to fix this? Obviously, this is something we've got to fix right now. So what we did as a starting point, I think we need to really let Congress know how serious of a problem we have here. We thought that the first thing we could do was start a petition. So we have organized a petition. We've had a number of people sign on to it, but we need many more. I think in order for Congress to take this seriously, we need tens of thousands of signatures. If you at the end, there'll be a longer link, but if you look in the on your menu, there should be something that says offers, and if you click on that, you'll see an option there. You can click through to sign the petition if you want to join and help us, and please share it with all your friends as well. So in addition to that, we need to get allies. We need to grow our support here. We do have some important allies with the Farm Bureau and the National Farmers Union, who both support increasing the THC level. Farm Bureau has official policy at 1%. The National Farmers Union went one step further, and they actually adopted a recommendation of 3%. We need also now to get states on board. We need to get the governors and the ag commissioners, and ultimately NASDA, which is represents all the agriculture commissioners, to be advocating for this too. So I think there's going to be some work that we need to do at the state level. We need a lot of our allies here and farmers to go to the states and tell them. I mean, the ag commissioners don't want to destroy farmers' crops, and I think they should be our natural allies in this. Once they realize that this is not, this is about protecting the industry, not about growing marijuana here. So we also have to educate congressional staff, and we're gonna work later in the year to try to get constituent calls and meetings, perhaps Zoom meetings with congressional offices advocating for this. We need legislation too. We're also working on trying to get somebody to take the lead on introducing a bill that would change this. We've got to put a big push. Congress has to see what's happening out here in the industry and how it's impacting farmers. And then, as Courtney mentioned, we're also pushing to try to see if we can extend the 2014 Farm Bill program to allow for some flexibility, at least in some of the states, until we can get the 1% fix. So I would encourage everybody to share what you learned on this webinar, sign the petition, share the petition, check out Courtney and Ag Hemp Solutions, get in touch with them about how you can get involved, and reach out to us as well. Those are our main takeaways as far as trying to get us to 1% here.
Thank you. And how big of a lift do you guys think this really is, in the context of there's broader cannabis reform going on? Certainly, there's DEA and DOJ who, have their positions on hemp. There's the international scheduling of cannabis, which is, there's certain recommendations by WHO to change the scheduling of cannabis internationally that may impact this, particularly a potential to add a footnote that would exempt from control cannabis at 0.2%, which I think could create some significant challenges for the industry. Where do you think we're going to get opposition here? And who needs to really be the champion of this reform? Is it going to be our same allies, Wyden and McConnell and Hemp, or do we need to bring in the broader kind of cannabis community here?
Well, I definitely think it's going to be, anytime you're trying to do something in an election year, you're always facing, this is Congress is about to go on recess. They go on recess for August, and when they come back, not a whole lot gets done between now and the election in November. There's a short so-called lame duck session that they hold after that. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I would say that expecting it to happen this year, I don't think it's super likely. So we're going to have to work really hard on it. I would like to say that there's a path to it before the next farm bill, but I think the most likely place where we have a shot to get it is in the next farm bill. I think we'll just have to. But if farmers are getting hurt, maybe we can convince members of the Ag Committee that this is critical enough that they've got to do it. And I believe we can do it without really opening up the farm bill. That's one of the concerns I've heard from a few congressional offices. But we're just talking about the definition here. We're not talking about changing ag policy in a larger sense. So I'm hopeful, but it's going to be a lot of work. We're going to really have to. They're going to have to hear a really loud message from the industry.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Eric just said. This is something that we have been advocating for from day one. I know my very first meetings in DC with the congressional offices, I was talking about 1%, bringing them the science, explaining the difference between different varieties of cannabis for them. And it really is kind of this historical reefer madness fear that we are still overcoming in a lot of offices. And we have successfully, gotten over that. Hemp is legal. It's heavily regulated, but it is still a legal commodity. But there still is, and there was a lot of concern about what's going to happen when we open up the door for hemp. How is that going to lead to other types of cannabis reform? And so that's still things that we have to be very cognizant of. And so, Eric already mentioned, Senator McConnell's office was not supportive of 1% at all. They would not go beyond the 0.3. And that's one of the main reasons why we were stuck with that. Seeing what's happened to several of the farmers in Kentucky and around the country really is going to speak very loudly to Congress. If their farmers are losing crops that are valuable and creating economic disincentives, that's a problem. It's a problem that they are going to want to address. And so we have to rally together as an industry, provide the science, be very cognizant in the messages that we're conveying to Congress, but also what we're doing in the marketplace every single day. If we're pushing the limits beyond, what was theoretically allowed for, and folks are trying to, create things that aren't really within the framework of what has been provided for, that's going to create concern, and it's going to fall right into the fear that we have been trying to overcome all of these years. And Sean mentioned, about the greater cannabis movement and industry. I think that's such a great point, is that, we really have to be cognizant. What is it going to look like once marijuana is legal? That is going to happen sooner than later. And, a lot of us would like to see end product regulation. It really shouldn't matter what's happening in the field. Have USDA regulate what's happening in the field, have requisite agencies regulate what's happening at the end product stage. It's actually going on into the marketplace. And I do think that makes a lot of sense, but we're not there yet, right? Marijuana is still not legal. Medical marijuana still is not legal on a federal level. And so we still have to think about where have we come, where are we, and where do we want to go, and what's the smartest way to do so.
Thanks. And yeah, it seems that on that note, with everything that's been put forth this afternoon, that getting to 1% is really the science grounded policy that we should be operating off of, but it's going to take some effort. So giving states the ability to operate under 2014, while we address these broader issues, seems to be the ideal, even if not perfect, solution. And I want to reiterate what Courtney said at the beginning of the webinar, that the time here is shorter than we think, and these final rules will be here, in just around the corner. And we're in a pandemic. It's particularly challenging to effectuate change. So we really need to focus and get to work. And I think the industry has rightfully, put a lot of effort and focus into the FDA issue, which is, a separate webinar, but a really critical industry issue for the sustainability and survival of the industry. But we're not going to be able to have a viable agricultural hemp industry without addressing the IFR and the issues presented today. So I think doing the work to extend the 2014 Farm Bill, provide comment to change these problematic provisions in the IFR, and with the long game getting us to 1%, we really need folks to engage, and even if it's just talking to your state representative, your state Department of Agriculture, and letting them know how it impacts your business, that goes a long way. We've got a lot of questions here, so I can start taking a few. What about defining post-decarboxylation? If the total theoretical THC is not supported by science as a realistic indicator of THC in decarboxylated hemp because it overestimates. So have there been any discussions, efforts about further defining the term post-decarboxylation? Interesting.
Courtney, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, there have been discussions about that, for the past year and a half. I know that, National Hemp Association actually made a direct proposal to the Senate Agriculture Committee about that. And, if we want to see changes like that, that is going to require science-based evidence, just like any of the changes that we want to see. And so if there are folks that would like to see a definition like that, I encourage them to get in contact with us, provide us the science-based evidence, and we're happy to work on any clarifications that can really make things clear. The other thing I would note is that there's been so much reliance on the post-decarboxylation language, but that's not the full clause that's in the 2018 Farm Bill. I specifically worked on that inclusion of or similarly reliable methods, and that's something that Senator Wyden and Senator Murphy's office and I have been really trying to emphasize. And unfortunately, despite how much we've conveyed that to USDA, the holdup has really been on that post-decarboxylation language.
Thank you. And then it looks like there's a couple of questions on where the 0.5% limit came from. And to be clear, the legal standard for hemp is 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis, as set forth in the Farm Bill. But the interim final rules contain certain compliance requirements, and where they can take corrective action for negligent violations of the USDA plan. So those include failure to provide a legal description of your land, producing hemp without a license, and also producing cannabis plants exceeding the 0.3% THC level. And they provide a safe harbor here for producers that end up with plants that exceed 0.3 but fall under 0.5% on a dry weight basis. And that hemp is not considered a negligent violation so long as the producer made reasonable efforts to grow hemp. So maybe they use certified seed, maybe they use seed that is reliably grown compliantly in other parts of the country, or engage in other best practices. And this is, I think, a little bit of a cushion, but frankly, a little margin for error. A grower that makes reasonable efforts to grow hemp, but can easily exceed 0.5%. Based on a number of factors, especially since we're in many states just starting to grow this crop for the first time in decades, and they would still commit a negligent violations, and 3 negligent violations over a 5-year period results in a 5-year ban from producing hemp. So that provision, I think, is particularly problematic. It also, if the violation was committed with a culpable mental state greater than negligence, the violations can be referred to the Attorney General, Chief Law Enforcement. So there's some real onerous penalties that are not, I think, adequate for an agricultural crop here. Let's see. Who is involved in the drafting of the standards folded into the Farm Bill and I guess interim final rule?
I think there were a lot of stakeholders that had opportunities for input, but ultimately Senator McConnell and Senator Wyden were the primary drafters of the legislation, and they, there were all sorts of groups at the table providing input. So, but it was written by congressional offices essentially.
And I like this question. What is being done to incorporate science into the genesis of these rules and standards?
I know I'm sending them as many scientific studies as I get my hands on. In all of the negotiations we had, in working on the 2018 Farm Bill and working on the interim final rules with USDA, we provided them, documentation, evidence, testimony, not only myself, not only Eric, members of the industry, right? We all had that opportunity during the comment period. There was that open webinar that, several folks presented at, and that's the opportunities that were publicly given for folks to engage. And so those were the opportunities. And there are, those opportunities continue on. Formal lobbying efforts is an opportunity for folks to engage. The upcoming public comment period is an opportunity for folks to engage, to submit evidence and, solution-based comments.
And why only 1%? Comment says we should be asking for up to 5 for fiber crops where THC is lost during processing. And I'll turn this over to Courtney and Eric, but I think kind of balancing what we know in science versus what's going to be viable and able to be understood by Congress and others who have significant concerns with intoxicating THC, as well as concerns with the scheduling of cannabis internationally, notwithstanding the Controlled Substances Act that would need to change. But any other thoughts there?
Well, I know the WHO's made a recommendation to deschedule CBD, and I guess it sounds like there's a possibility the UN will take that up later this year. They're looking at other cannabis-related issues, and the international scheduling it's a potential block to sort of removing cannabis prohibition broadly, but international law does allow for hemp specifically. So as far as I know, that's not blocking what we're trying to do with hemp, I don't believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. The exemption for hemp in the international treaties that exist currently exempts industrial hemp, and some member states interpret that only to mean fiber and seed, while others argue that that also includes any, derivative of a legal hemp plant, including CBD, and they simply didn't know about CBD, when the treaty was drafted. So there's an interesting and relevant debate going on there, and the current recommendation would exempt CBD at 0.2% or below. So it could really result in some problematic consequences for the U.S. and other countries. The EU just halted its process for CBD as ingredients in novel foods based on the international scheduling of CBD. So I think that paying attention to the international discussions as we have the national discussions in parallel is really important.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. I would clarify, right? It's about 0.2% CBD. It's not about the plant itself, but I think it is really important that we are paying attention on the international level, especially as hemp is legal and a lot of folks want to engage in international commerce. And so we have to be very cognizant about what rules do we have in place here and what are the rules in place in the countries that we're engaging in commerce with, and how does that interplay work out, especially as we're trying to push policy forward and try to get to this 1% that several other countries do have. But right, we have to be thinking about that as we're trying to advance our policy.
And then there's a request for clarification on the mandatory DEA registration. Has it been walked back? And what does that mean for the final rule?
Unfortunately, the only thing that USDA did was to say that they were going to delay it for a year. We thought they should remove it completely. Definitely advocated for that. So it's still in there. It just doesn't take effect until the 2021 season. So,
right, and I think that's really important that this is brought up. Right, this is because the enforcement guidance came out, right, and they said, as Eric just mentioned, either until October 31 of 2021 or until final rules are published. If that clause is still in the final rules, that requirement is still going to be there. And just a month and a half ago, USDA published on their website a list of the labs registered by the DEA. That is a very clear indication that that is not going away. And so folks need to be prepared for that, and the labs need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and it needs to, when the public comment period opens again, it needs to continue to be, this issue needs to continue to be raised loudly and widely by the industry until there's a permanent fix.
on another note related to labs and testing, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has launched a effort to work with labs on cannabis testing, and basically they're going to have samples that have a preset amount of different cannabinoids sent out to labs that want to participate, and the labs will provide their test results, and then they will publish those anonymously. In other words, not say which lab got what right or wrong, but just to show generally where the industry is, and then work with those labs to try to improve testing so that we can get more accurate testing on cannabinoids, cannabis generally.
Yeah, Eric, that's such a fantastic point. And I've heard from some researchers recently that they are really trying to work on ensuring that labs are getting hemp standards rather than just general cannabis standards because of the detail of testing that's required to get to that 0.3%.
A couple more questions. What do you see as the prospects for extending the 2014 Farm Bill authorities through fiscal year 2021 as provided in the Ag Appropriations Bill recently passed by the House?
I think it's a great step forward, right? I mean, it's not exactly the clause that we want to see, but it's gotten through the House. Obviously, it's supposed to go through the full legislative process, approved through the Senate, full vote, through the president. So I think there's hope. A continuing resolution is another path forward, and I'll reiterate again, I would like to see the extension through January 1 of 2022 and not another arbitrary date of September 31st as was provided by the House.
Initially, there were aggressive background check requirements for hemp license applicants. Where do we stand today? And is there growing focus on social equity opportunities? I think we addressed this at the beginning a little bit, but there is a current restriction in the rules prohibiting those who have drug convictions in the past 10 years from participating as key participants or those with significant management control or equity of a license in the program. And there are efforts, including by Vote Hemp, to reform these provisions. It does have to be reformed statutorily, but because we have this ban in place, most states do have background check requirements, at least for the key participants.
And I just add that, that requirement is now going to be in all jurisdictions with that interim final rule requirement in the 2018 Farm Bill rule. But in any states that had these in place beforehand and may have had more restrictive ones, that was their choice. That was not required in the 2014 Farm Bill. And so if your state has had even more restrictive licensing requirements, and that really is advocacy that also needs to be done on the state level.
Good point. Any thoughts on USDA NOP sending written notice to organic certifiers that hemp CBD can't be certified?
Yeah, that's super frustrating. We just got that a few days ago, and it looks like a continued effort by the FDA to try to do whatever they can to undermine the industry on the cannabinoid side. So essentially, they sent out a letter. They didn't threaten anybody, but they let the certifiers know that the position of the FDA was that cannabinoids or extracts with cannabinoids in them were not legal to sell, and that they were, maybe risking their reputation if they were going to certify a crop on that basis. So I don't know what the net impact is going to be with certifiers, but sadly, the FDA is continuing to do whatever it can to undermine the industry, and we've got to push back on that. Congress has got to do something to stop the FDA. They still are dragging their feet and not resolving, how this is going to be regulated. Although they have submitted a proposed or enforcement priorities, I guess, to the OMB for review, and we haven't got a copy of that yet, but hopefully that'll be out soon. But I'm not encouraged about what it's going to say.
Yeah, I have the same sentiment. This is a good question. Out of all the top issues we've discussed, what do you believe is the easiest battle to win?
Amending the final rules, really, because we're in an open rulemaking period, right? This is our opportunity. The public comment period is coming up. We have an opportunity to make the change. Amending rules in an open rulemaking period is easier than passing legislation. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it's easier than passing legislation. There is a lot of coordinated effort that still has to be put in place, and a lot of attention to detail during this rulemaking period, because it's not that we're just advocating with USDA, right? I think USDA really does have our backs, and they want to see this industry succeed. It's the restrictions and the constraints that are still being put in place by the DEA because of marijuana being illegal and still scheduled under the Controlled Substances Act. So we have an opportunity, but a lot of work needs to be done, and that it's only going to be successful if everybody's working together and has a coordinated effort and a consistent message and voice.
Thank you. And I think that's a great note to end on. We had a large number of questions, so apologies if I didn't get to yours, but please feel free to contact any of us following the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. There's some great questions and comments in here. But thank you everyone for your time today, and I do encourage everyone to really get engaged and to do your part to protect our hemp industry. And I'll turn it over to Courtney and Eric for any final words on their initiatives.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what we've been saying this whole time. This is your opportunity to engage. This is your opportunity to have your voice heard, your voice elevated by participating in these upcoming public comment periods, reaching out to myself and Eric, and joining our campaigns, join the AGHS lobbying campaign to work on the interim final rules, sign the Vote Hemp petition, support federal lobbying so that we can ensure that our rules really are setting the science-based foundation that we want to see. And there's, as Sean mentioned, there's a lot of questions that were unanswered. If you want, please reach out to us. You can reach me at the email here, but also campaigns@agriculturalhempsolutions.com. We're happy to answer your questions. If you'd like to learn more about the campaign and how you can get involved, we have tiers of engagement. So please reach out to us, because this is really our opportunity. I really feel like we're this beautiful hemp community, and we've grown so much over all of these years. And I want to see this industry succeed, and I want to see this industry succeed for a very, very long time. This crop is absolutely incredible. It can do so many amazing things. We are really just beginning to see what this plant can do, and it's really going to take all of us to really continue to push for the advancement of our industry and to see that our industry succeeds.
Agreed. And I would just remind everyone you're not in this alone. We're in this together, and both Courtney and Eric have these incredible platforms they've been working to build for years that can help give you a voice, can help make sure your voice is heard, on the Hill or with your state representatives. And we're here to support, and we're only going to get through this together. So please don't hesitate to engage and to make your voice heard. We need the feedback from farmers, from operators, and that's the only way we're going to make real change here.